Hello everyone. Today we are going to talk about Jonathan Swift. He was born in 1667 in Dublin. Now today when we hear Dublin, we think about one of the best cities in the world, coming always amongst the top 20 cities of the world to live in. But in the 17th century, Ireland was going through a very tough time. Indeed, so much so that Swift was hopeless that anything could come out of his political struggle that was dedicated to alert the public of the social, political, and economic turmoil. But this side of Swift is not presented in the mainstream literature. He is remembered for his satires. Amongst them, the most famous is Gulliver's Travels, showing his remarkable genius. He is read as a children's writer, writing funny imaginary stories. But when one picks up his pamphlet that we are going to discuss in this video, A Short View of the State of Ireland, published in 1728, one will pick up Gulliver's Travels again from a completely different perspective. There is another thing to note here. The role of genius in a state where everything is going wrong, when everything is going right. No one listens to the critics. But when everything is going wrong, then everyone seeks a sage, someone with the right mind who can feed the public at least some ideas about how to go around fixing the country. This was the role Swift was playing at the time. In the same pamphlet, Swift laments. There is not one argument used to prove the riches of Ireland, which is not a logical demonstration of its poverty. The rise of our rents is squeezed out of the very blood and vitals and clothes and dwellings of the tenants who live worse than English beggars. The lowness of interest, in all other countries a sign of wealth, is in us a proof of misery, there being no trade to employ any borrower. Hence alone comes the dearness of land, since the savers have no other way to lay out their money. Hence the dearness of necessaries for life, because the tenants cannot afford to pay such extravagant rates for land, which they must take or go a begging, without raising the price of cattle and of corn, although they should live upon chaff. Hence our increase of buildings in the city, because workmen have nothing to do but employ one another, and one half of them are infallibly undone. Hence, the daily increase of bankers who may be a necessary evil in a trading country, but so ruinous in ours, who for their private advantage have sent away all our silver and 1/3 of our gold, so that within 3 years past the running cash of the nation, which was about 500,000 pounds, is now less than 2, and must daily diminish, unless we have liberty to coin, as well as that important kingdom, the Isle of Man, and the meanest prince in the German Empire, as I before observed. In such a state, Swift, like every other intellectual in a developing country, had to play the role of the sane critic. This pamphlet is chosen for this video because of the 14 simple principles that Swift provides in it, which he thinks are necessary to bring back glory to any state. So let's begin with them. Before going to them, it must be said that these principles are now textbook principles in international economy, in the courses in universities. Swift says, I shall only enumerate by rules generally known and never contradicted what are the true causes of any country's flourishing and growing rich. Then he begins. The first cause of a kingdom's thriving is the fruitfulness of the soil, to produce the necessaries and conveniencies of life, not only sufficient for the inhabitants, but for exportation into other countries. Every country ought to have a thriving agricultural industry so that they are not dependent upon the mercy of other countries to feed them. This becomes even more of a problem during the time of global crisis. In today's world, we can see Ukraine was one of the main exporters of wheat to Europe and the world. But today it has become a problem for all these countries who imported wheat from Ukraine. Swift continues, the second is the industry of the people in working up all their native commodities to the last degree of manufacture. The global market now would laugh at this suggestion. A single iPhone production requires a collaboration of at least 50 countries. But it can be counter-argued that iPhone is not a native commodity. It is internationally made and internationally used commodity. This argument is flawed because at the end of the day, Apple, the producer of iPhone, is an American company. Swift's second principle follows the first in spirit of creating a condition in which a state can make independent economic policy. Swift continues further. The third is the conveniency of safe ports and havens to carry out their own goods as much as manufactured and bring in those of others as little manufactured as the nature of mutual commerce will allow. Here, in modern terms, he is suggesting that net exports should always remain positive and healthy. That is to say, a country should export more than it imports. This, as everyone knows, strengthens the local currency and decreases demand of foreign currency because there are less foreign payments to be made. Coming to the fourth principle, he says the fourth is that the natives should, as much as possible, export and import their goods in vessels of their own timber, made in their own country. This is an interesting suggestion. It also demonstrates how much independence he wanted for Ireland. It is an extension of the previous suggestion. So what he is saying is that basically the state should have a big fleet of containers that should carry out the logistical operations for the import and export of local products. This problem will become pronounced in the upcoming years if China and the US continue to be stuck in the Thucydidean trap, because right now China is the largest producer of ship containers, which means that most of the world trade travels through the seas thanks to China. It can block its usage and create havoc in any country. Swift provides the fifth and sixth principles as follows. The fifth is the liberty of a free trade in all foreign countries, which will permit them, except those who are in war with their own prince or state. The sixth is by being governed only by laws made with their own consent, for otherwise they are not a free people. And therefore, all appeals for justice or applications for favor or preferment to another country are so many grievous impoverishments. There is hardly any direct case relevant to these principles on the first look, but once closely analyzed, in the case of Pakistan for example, which is debt inflicted and dances on the fingers of an international monetary institution, this suggestion is not out of date. Swift is basically saying here that every country should have the right to create its own independent economic policy, which Ireland did not have at that time because it was under the British rule. Swift continues ahead. The seventh is by improvement of land, encouragement of agriculture, and thereby increasing the number of their people, without which any country, however blessed by nature, must continue poor. Improvement of land does not mean improvement of the soil. Over here, he means the real estate industry architecture, both urban and rural. That is to say, the whole land of the country requires proper attention so that there are no obstruction for the citizens to fulfill their potential. Whether it be production of food or development of roads and infrastructure or the building of highways connecting rural with urban areas, all of these must be kept in mind. The next two suggestions are brief and self-explanatory. The eighth is the residence of the princes or chief administrators of the civil power. The ninth is the concourse of foreigners for education, curiosity or pleasure, and as to a general mart of trade. Then comes the principle that has become the blueprint for obtaining foreign citizenship. Swift says, the 10th is by disposing all offices of honor, profit or trust only to the natives, or at least with very few exceptions, where strangers have long inhabited the country and are supposed to understand and regard the interest of it as their own. Strangers must have long inhabited the country so that they have assimilated their interests with the national interest of the people and the government. We can see people like Farage and other right-wing nationalists openly saying that there are certain groups of citizens that are not in harmony with the local culture. The right way is not to throw them out, but to keep them at bay from all offices of honor, profit or trust and compensate them with other rights and privileges. At least that's what Swift is suggesting. Now comes the 11th and 12th principle that should be drummed in the heads of states like Sri Lanka and Pakistan, and all those leaders who spend their time and investments in a country other than they were born in, the countries that made them the leader of their own country. Swift angrily suggests the 11th is when the rents of land and profits of employment are spent in the country which produced them and not in another, the former of which will certainly happen where the love of our native country prevails. The 12th is by the public revenues being all spent and employed at home except on the occasion of a foreign war. This was the major Irish economic problem at that time. All the taxes generated from Ireland were spent in England, and hardly anything was thought by the English regarding the state of the Irish people. Swift later in the pamphlet also provides examples of how much rent is being drained from the Irish coffers, and yet even the sewerage system remains in dire condition in Ireland. The next principle is again peculiarly Irish in nature because at that time British pound was the local currency of Ireland, which did not allow Ireland to have its own central bank, which in turn meant that they could not mint their own money. The 13th is where the people are not obliged, unless they find it for their own interest or conveniency, to receive any monies except of their own coinage by a public mint, after the manner of all civilized nations. The last principle is more of a plea to the people rather than the government, he suggests. The 14th is a disposition of the people of a country to wear their own manufactures and import as few incitements to luxury, either in clothes, furniture, food, or drink, as they possibly can live conveniently without. All these principles are as relevant to a developing country as they are for the Ireland of the 17th century. In fact, even countries that count themselves amongst the most developed countries can also bear heed to the problems Swift has highlighted in these principles, so that they can manage or at least delay their decline. Once the Parthenon was unconquerable, today it lies in ruins. Once the capital in Rome shook everyone to the core, now only its ruins stand. Once Baghdad stood high with its house of wisdom, now it is a city people are afraid to visit. Once, so you can go on about these instances. There is a general rule of history. A nation achieves its honor through sweat and success, as Swift has pointed out, but then it gets the vertigo at the height of surplus wealth, and the castle in the air comes crashing down. People who are responsible for this crashing down are no one but who think that they have the immunity to do anything that they want. I hope you understood that. Please subscribe to the channel. We'll see you soon. Thank you everyone.